So it snowed this week. For many of us, I'm aware that the cold is not your friend, that a number of you will shortly flee south to warmer waters, that the icy blanket brings a sliver even of sorrow to your hearts. For me, well, I didn't see snow until I was 19 on a ski trip to New Zealand with an old friend, keeping in mind that New Zealand isn't so far from my native Australia. And forget living in the snow. That didn't happen until many years later, until I was in rabbinical school. There in Cincinnati, I learned the joys of scraping the windshield and the crisp powder crunching under my boots. I was totally entranced the first time I saw snowflakes falling, sitting in a class taught by a professor who happens to be from Montreal. My eyes grew wide and my mouth opened gobsmacked as I realized what was happening, and my classmates looked at me like I was crazy. I remained totally entranced at each snowfall, and as I watched the tiny flakes tumble outside my office window, I sometimes think to myself, what if we lived like this more often, more full of awe, more full of awareness? Our ancestor Jacob models this idea in our Torah this week in Parashat Vayetze. The parasha opens with our patriarch falling asleep on a rock along his adventures running away from his brother Esau. As he sleeps, he has a vision, his famous dream of angels ascending and descending a ladder that reaches all the way up to the heavens. V'yachalom v'hine sulam mutzav arza v'rasho magia hashamayma v'hine malachei Adonai olim v'yordim bo. He, Jacob, had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached the sky, and messengers of God were going up and down on it. Our rabbis spill much ink trying to determine who these malachei Adonai, these messengers of God, are. For example, one midrash explains that the messengers going up the ladder have already escorted Jacob into the land of Israel, whilst those going down are sent to escort him on his travels, the rest of his adventure. According to another midrash, the angels are not ascending and descending between heaven and earth, but upon Jacob himself, dancing and leaping. That's because this Hebrew word bo can be translated as either on it, on a thing, or on him, on a person. Yet in our modern time, Rabbi Lawrence Kushner observes another more obvious interpretation, which is that the angels might not reside in heaven, but could be ordinary human beings who live on earth, shuttling back and forth between this world and the heavenly realm. In other words, he believes that all of us can figuratively ascend to heaven and attain spiritual awareness and thus become Malachei Adonai, messengers of God. At the end of this incident, God blesses Jacob, or in the middle of this incident, God blesses Jacob, who then awakens seemingly suddenly and declares, Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati, and then ... manora hamakom hazeh. God is surely in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place? Put differently, as Dr. Ellen Umansky points out, Jacob has this life-altering, life-changing event happen to him, and he gains an entirely new perspective and insight. If God was in that place, could God be in others? Where else could God be? What else had Jacob not seen, not paid attention to? Here we can look to Martin Buber's I-Thou philosophy, in which we are drawn into relationship with the world around us, whether it's a bird, a tree, or another human being. Of course, a relationship with another human is different to that with, let's say, a squirrel. Nonetheless, it too is somehow reciprocal, and it too represents an opportunity or presents an opportunity for us to turn a thou into a you, It is these I-you connections that, according to Buber, are what enable us to encounter the eternal you, or i.e., God. Of course, we also can't be this way all the time. Buber acknowledges that it's difficult to stay so alert and be so present without getting exhausted or becoming inauthentic in our approach. Rather, he is wondering what would happen if, rather than simply walking by or hurrying along as we might normally do amidst our busy days, we stopped for a second. What if we allowed ourselves, in the words of Buber, to be drawn into relation with whatever it is that we find ourselves intrigued by, with that which is right in front of our faces? Like Jacob in his dream, Buber is sure that we'll discover something we might not have been open to or been able to notice otherwise. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel would term this radical amazement, lamenting his perceived decline of our spirit of wonder as we continue to advance and find answers to questions we weren't able to look at previously. Heschel states quite dramatically that life without wonder is not worth living. And in fact, it is this wonder that is the root of our happiness as humans. It is the key for him to our understanding of God, to overcoming complacency and to living in full appreciation of our abilities. For example, it's not just about what we see, but about the very act of seeing with our own eyes in the first place. Or not just about thinking, but about the fact that we can begin to think at all, and that there is such a thing as facts at all. Using the snow example, it is about appreciating not just how beautiful the snow is, but about the notion that we have seasons in the first place, and that we can experience the full spectrum of cold and heat, and notice the delicate piles of powder on the tree branches. In essence, once we stop to contemplate, wonder, that awareness that we are rooting ourselves in, is something that we are or can be confronted with everywhere, all the time. It turns out that we can, in fact, live each day with our eyes just a little bit more open. We can turn to our Siddur for several examples, or just one that I'll bring. Earlier in our service, we read together, as we do every evening, "Bechochma pateach she'arim uvitfuna meshane itim, umachalif et hazmanim umesader et hakochavim." We praise God as the one whose wisdom opens the gates of heaven, whose insight alters time and switches over the seasons, who sets the course of the stars in the sky. Like Jacob's dream and before Buber's I thou, our liturgy already inherently encourages us to lift our heads up to the sky and dream. Instead of rushing home during our evening commute, our prayers say to us, "Look up and see the stars. How amazing that they shine each night. How incredible that they form constellations. How small are we under the night sky. How magnificent that the sun will shine again in the morning." In other words, pay attention to the vast and wondrous world around us, the world which is both God's and ours, if only we stop to notice it, even for a moment. Just as night rolls back over into daytime and daytime will turn once again to night, I know full well that the snow enchantment is temporary. As the days turn to weeks, as the sky stays grey, as the fresh powder turns to slush, the cold won't be as appealing anymore. And I'll long for long summer days by the beach back home in Australia, or up on Maple Lake at Camp George in Muskoka, which probably looks very different this week. Yet, as the news stays heavy and the weather stays cold, perhaps it's more important than ever to try see a small spark of the divine in the everyday, in a grain of sand, a star, or in a snowflake. Shabbat Shalom.